Our spirit is like very unique. Like on a spirit level, we have these unique gifts to discover and to nurture and to give to the world. And on a soul level, we're all the same. We all carry the same light and potential.
What do you think gets in the way of us recognizing the infinite potential of our soul?
I think it is the mind. And, the definition of mind is like a storehouse of thoughts and emotions. Looking at the thoughts and emotions that fill our minds and really observing which are the ones that are holding us back and that are draining our energy and are creating blocks inside of us, and which are the ones that are nurturing, and uplifting. There's this understanding in science now that our thoughts affect our health. The yogis even understood like what kind of thoughts are affecting what parts of the body, and how is that leading to particular types of imbalances and illnesses. So it's not just that our thoughts and emotions affect our health, but there's an understanding that these types of thoughts and emotions affect these types of subtle winds and subtle energy centers, and that's affecting our health. And so if we have that knowledge, I can do particular meditations and awareness practices and particular movements to target that area and to help me move through that emotion.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoyed this episode. Over 3,000 years ago, yogis knew what scientists are discovering today. The mind has the power to destroy us or to propel us to greater peace, vitality, and freedom. Yet yoga's profound teachings on the mind and consciousness are often overlooked in contemporary practices, which tend to primarily focus on physical postures and breath work. Today, my guest Reema Datta will share these timeless teachings with us, emphasizing the practices and principles we can adopt to enhance our lives. Reema Datta is the founder of the Yogi Way, a holistic method that integrates movement, breathing, and consciousness practices with a focus on emotional well-being. She is certified to teach Ashtanga yoga and Tibetan heart yoga and is an Ayurvedic therapist. Since 2002, she has taught yoga trainings and retreats in over 20 countries across 5 continents. Her students include Sting, Paul Simon, Edie Brickell, Zainab Salbi, Sujatha Baliga, and thousands of other practitioners globally. In this interview, Reema will offer lessons and practices rooted in yogic wisdom, cutting-edge science, and the realities of modern life. These will empower us to break free from our mind's destructive tendencies and experience lasting peace. Hello, Reema. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. So I'm really excited to welcome you to the show to discuss the timeless perspective of the Yogi's Way, which you seem to be an expert in. And many of my listeners know that I'm a big proponent of drawing insights from ancient wisdom and the lessons that they provide. And you've done an amazing job of encapsulating the essence and the significance of Vedic philosophy. And I can't wait to delve deep into this topic with you today. Reema, let's start out by getting to know you better and you telling us about your personal journey with yoga and how that shaped your philosophy and everything that you share in your book, The Yogi's Way.
Studying yoga in the West, I really started studying yoga in the West when I was about 25. I was living in San Francisco at the time. And I connected with the Ashtanga studio. And Ashtanga is like Ashtanga based on Sri Patabi Joyce's sequences, which are very like physically demanding. And it was the first time I practiced yoga in that way, with such an emphasis on the physical aspect of yoga. And actually, for me at that time, it was amazing. Like just getting strong in my body helped me to get strong in my mind. I felt that connection. And at that time when I was practicing Ashtanga, I was practicing 6 days a week. I was stronger in my body than I had ever been. And I made some really big changes in my life. I was working for the UN. I quit my job. I decided to dedicate my life to yoga and to live in San Francisco. And I don't think I would have had the courage to make those huge life changes if it wasn't for the strength I was building in my practice. So I got that from my Western teachers, just the mind body connection from that perspective. And I have to say, from my Indian family and teachers, I learned more about the mind. Like, how do we actually cultivate a strong mind? Which I find lacking in the West, like those wisdom teachings, which for the first 10 years I taught yoga, I was loving the physical aspects so much that I also focused on the physical, and I brought in teachings of the philosophy and Ayurveda and other elements in my teachings. But this focus was still the physical. And it wasn't until about 10 years after teaching that I started going through some personal traumas. And at that time, I realized that I need the teachings on the mind. And I need to learn how to deal with my thoughts and my emotions because I was experiencing a lot of anger and attachment and fear. Um, Basically, at that time, I had a 3-year-old daughter and I was separating from her father. And it was a very difficult time in my life. I was quite devastated. And so I was experiencing, all these tough emotions. And it was interesting to observe myself because I was seeing that like I've been practicing yoga for so long, I've been teaching for 10 years, but I'm still struggling in my mind. So then I got inspired to really dig into the wisdom teachings, the Vedic teachings that I grew up with. And so I went back to the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and these Vedic texts, and I started to read them. And the wisdom just came alive to me in a different way. And my whole approach to yoga changed. And I started to learn how we can not just see that these teachings about the mind are in these texts, but how to actually apply them to our practice and to our lives. And I did that for myself because I was suffering. And then I started teaching my friends and my colleagues, and then started doing workshops. I called it Yoga for Emotional Healing, and really started to bring those teachings on how to really cultivate mental and emotional resilience.
Thank
So
you for
that
sharing
those
that.
that all came from the Indian wisdom texts and teachers.
Yeah, it seems that yoga played a pivotal role in your development and your evolution, and also really helped you navigate those life storms that you went through in your life. And I think that sort of gave you faith in the practice and led you to teach it with so much heart and so much belief in its efficacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, my cat wants to be close to me right now.
That's fine. That's fine.
But,
Hello.
yeah, and the one other part about learning yoga in the West and East, in my book that I just got this last night, so
Oh,
I'm holding my hands for the first time. Um, so one thing I explain in the book is the spirit and the soul. And so our spirit is like very unique. Like on a spirit level, we have these unique gifts to discover and to nurture and to give to the world. And on a soul level, we're all the same. We all carry the same light and potential. And I have to say, like, in the with my Western teachers, I feel like I cultivated the courage to really connect with my spirit, like my unique path and gifts, which was honestly a little bit of a struggle because I find there's like a divide between Indian culture and philosophy. Like the philosophy is like liberation and freedom, and the culture can be a little bit oppressive. Like the culture can say like this is what you should do, and and I don't know how it was for you, but for me and a lot of my friends growing up in the United States and first generation here, like our parents wanted us to be doctors, like the
Yeah.
rebels in our family became
Yes.
lawyers, you know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yes. Yep. We're from the same
So
culture, so I'm well aware of that social script.
yeah, so that was huge
Yeah.
for me. I mean, I went to college, I was pre-med for the first 2 years, and it's pretty heavy, the pressure that we can
Hmm.
grow up with those expectations. And I ended up, majoring in international relations and working for the UN. And even though I was doing well in New York, I've always been drawn to yoga, especially the philosophy. And after 9/11 and after starting to study Ashtanga, I made these huge life changes. And my family was honestly quite upset.
I can
They were,
imagine.
sometimes my
Like you're
Western
doing
friends
what?
don't
You're teaching
understand.
yoga?
They're like,
What?
I
We didn't
know.
send you to school for this.
Exactly. We didn't immigrate all the way to the United States for you to
Right.
become a
And
teacher.
then
Like,
they
that's
try giving
crazy.
you a guilt trip, we came here
Yeah.
with hardly any money. Yeah.
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 It was very shocking to them.
Yeah.
And, in our culture, yoga teachers are usually older. I was only 25 when I started teaching. And so even that was so strange to my family, like this culture of young teachers. Because in India, most teachers are older and they teach from
That's
decades
true.
of experience.
Mm.
But I had this very clear calling to go on this route. And I feel like I got that courage and that focus to really honor my unique path from my Western teachers and really honor my spirit. But then, from the wisdom of India and my Indian teachers, I learned more about the soul. And again, as I mentioned, at the soul level, we all are the same. We all have the same infinite light and potential that move through us. And that is also so huge to realize that, because that gives you the courage to go for it. So
Yeah.
to have these practices, a lot of yoga practices, the original practices connect us to our soul, to that infinite possibility, and to really, not just as a concept that we're pure potential, but to do all these practices to open up our body and our mind to feel it, the truth of that in every cell of our body, that anything is possible. That I live in a world of endless possibility. And at my soul level, I carry that endless possibility. And that is like foundational.
What do you think gets in the way of us recognizing the infinite potential of our soul? Is it the mind? Because you do talk about how the mind and these certain belief systems can prevent us from appreciating our magnificence and what everything that we're capable of doing.
Yeah, I think it is the mind. And, the definition of mind is like a storehouse of thoughts and emotions. So that's what became a big focus in my book and in my teachings now is looking at the thoughts and emotions that fill our minds and really observing which are the ones that are holding us back and that are draining our energy and are creating blocks inside of us, and which are the ones that are nurturing and uplifting. So a lot of the book and the trainings that I do are recognizing our kleshas.
Yes.
And klesha, I wrote about in the book, it's a
Yeah.
Sanskrit word that means a harmful thought or emotion. So some of the big ones are anger, attachment, fear, feelings of separation, confusion about how the world works. And so what I've started to do, focus on in my teachings and my own practice is how do we recognize our kleshas and then how do we work through them so they don't hold us back.
And you actually divide the mind into two parts, the higher mind and the lower mind. Can you please tell us more about that and how that works?
Sure. So this is from the Upanishads, and it's also referred to in the Bhagavad Gita, some of the ancient Vedic texts, which are carry the original teachings of yoga. So it's amazing. I mean, when I think about how old these teachings are, like this teaching about the lower mind and higher mind, it's in the Taittiriya Upanishad, which dates back to like fifth or sixth century BCE, which is
Wow.
mind-boggling. Like how just the refinement of the ancient yogis, their
Yeah.
understanding of the mind,
If
you
only
know?
other civilizations had access to it, we wouldn't have seen such atrocities that have happened in certain countries like over history. Just to have that
Yeah,
awareness of how the brain works, and it was there already, you know?
it's amazing how it was there and it was so like intricately understood and explained. So the lower mind is considered the part of the mind that's like conditioned and reactive. It's like it runs on autopilot. You know, like
Mm.
someone yells at me
The
and I yell
reptilian
right back.
brain.
Yes, yeah. Whereas the higher mind is the part of the mind that's connected to our deeper understanding, our deeper intuitions and truths about the world. So if someone is angry at me or yells at me, instead of just yelling right back, I can actually, if I'm in the higher mind, I can take a couple breaths and consider like maybe this person's having a terrible day and is hurting and suffering in their own way. And so instead of yelling right back at them and creating more suffering, maybe I'll just take a few breaths and just wish them well, you know, step aside, make sure I'm good and safe and not get entangled. So it's a huge shift to live from the higher mind and the lower mind. So a lot of yoga practices are how to make that shift.
Okay, and how do you achieve that state? Do you do certain postures or breath work, or is it just a combination of things that you do to be able to control the, well, not control, but manage the lower mind from kind of taking over and clouding our thoughts?
Mhm. You know, I think that's the beauty of yoga is that it's holistic at its heart, you know? So when we are in the lower mind and we're reactive and we're probably hurting ourselves and others, then what happens within the body and the mind is we develop granthis, which are knots. And granthis are specifically translated as very difficult knots to untie. So we're in the lower mind, we're reactive, we're hurting ourselves, others, these knots are forming within us. And it's over many years or decades or lifetimes. So that's why the yogi said these knots are very difficult to untie. So that's why just doing movement or just doing breath work, it's often not enough to untie the knots. So the beauty of yoga, as I'm appreciating it more and more, is that we work from the inside out. Like we work on our thoughts, we work on our emotions, we do a lot of contemplative practices. And we also understand the subtle body. You know, the body's made up of all these inner winds, and our thoughts and our emotions affect the inner winds. And they either create and deepen the knots or they loosen the knots. So there's a lot of wisdom to learn about how the thoughts and emotions affect our subtle body and our gross body. And so we integrate that wisdom into our movement practices. Like if I'm overcome with anger, then I have an understanding that anger affects the winds at my heart. And I might do more back bends and heart opening poses, shoulder exercises. So even the movement we practice with that kind of awareness that, like, how am I feeling right now? What's happening in my mind and my heart? And how can I break through something that might be limiting me? So it's a combination of like movement, breath work, awareness practices, contemplative practices. And then we work from all these different angles. Mantras are really powerful to help us shift out of harmful patterns and create nurturing like thought patterns. So that's one of the reasons there's so many yoga practices. It's because those knots are so difficult to untie. So we target them from all these different angles, and then we really start to loosen them and get the prana to flow.
And do different techniques work for, like, do they have different impacts on different people? I mean, can we kind of customize our practice based on what works for us?
Absolutely. Yeah. Which is why it's so good to work with a teacher, because a teacher can really, you know, tailor a practice to an individual's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual state.
Okay. Do you
So
look at their Ayurveda type? Because I know they're different types,
yes,
right?
I do, and I train my teachers my students to be able to, for at least the basics of Ayurveda, to understand and apply, because that does make a big difference, and even a basic understanding can help when you're cultivating your own practice or helping someone cultivate theirs.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. When people come to you for solutions, do you think they come with certain preconceived notions about what yoga is all about? Because there are a lot of stereotypes. There's a lot of cultural appropriation around yoga. What is your experience in that area?
I find people often get surprised when they come to a class or a workshop because they're like, we had no idea that yoga had all these elements or that it even carried these philosophical teachings. And it's amazing because I hear that even from practitioners who've been on the path for 10, 20, 30 years. So that, in a way, it's like when I used to travel quite a bit. I travel less now because I have a daughter, but when I traveled a lot, it was just very interesting to hear that over and over again. That we had no idea about this philosophy, about these other practices, because mostly yoga has become just a physical practice,
Yeah.
and I write in the book, about emotions and how to experience our emotions in helpful ways instead of harmful ways. And in a way, my journey with this book is an example of that because there have been moments where I feel like kind of angry or just frustrated. Like, how did this deep, sacred practice get reduced to just something physical? Sometimes I go to yoga classes and teachers are cursing while they're teaching, and there's like murtis and mandalas all around them. It's painful to see that. And so I've had moments of just feeling that kind of sadness and anger. But then the teachings of yoga are to like recognize our feelings, like let ourselves feel it. And then whether an emotion is healing and wholesome or harmful depends on how we experience it and express it. So it's like I could sit in my room and just like steep in anger and get all knotted up inside because that's only going to hurt myself, you know? Or I can recognize, okay, I have these feelings and I can catch the energy of the anger and consider like, what is the solution to this issue? And that actually inspired me to write this book. You know, like I was like, okay, yoga is so misunderstood and it's so misrepresented, but let me write a book that can help us understand it better and represent it better. Because I find that I have been on the staff of a lot of teacher training programs over the years. And even the teacher training that I first was a student of, it was all asana. I was like, how do you do these poses? How do you teach the poses? How do you give
So more
adjustments?
practical and more like mechanical.
Yeah, which is so important because as a yoga teacher, we have to have the knowledge to
Yeah,
not
of
hurt
course.
people
That's
in
the
our classes.
foundation. That's the
Yeah, so it's
foundation.
important to have those teachings of the physical.
Yeah.
But it was just amazing to me how lacking it was in the other aspects, especially the philosophy and the history and the
Yeah.
mental and emotional aspects.
Yeah.
So
And just
I took it upon
embodying the yoga philosophy. I think that what I'm hearing is it's more than just a practice. It's a way of
yeah,
being. It's
yeah,
and showing up in the world.
yes, exactly. So instead of just steeping in anger, I was like, well, this is a solution. I'm going to write a book and I'm going to do the best I can to help the greater yoga world and the teachers that are teaching to have tools to better deepen their own practice and then help others deepen their understanding and practice.
Yeah, and you've done a marvelous job of it because I myself have Indian heritage and it was so eye-opening for me. I had so many misconceptions about yoga. I was like, "Whoa, I had no
Yeah.
ideas." And that's when I knew like I had to talk to you and like
Oh,
get
yeah.
your
I'm
insights.
No, thank you. It's humbling though. It's humbling for me too because I mean, I know more philosophy and history than the average yoga instructor in the Western world. But even for me, I'm constantly learning.
Yeah.
It's like while I was writing this book, and even now, it's just I still feel like a baby on the path. Like
Yeah.
the wisdom, it's so deep, and that there's so much breadth to it that it's very humbling. Because even this book, I feel like it's just the beginning. You know.
Mm.
It's just the beginning of tapping into the deeper teachings.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you walk your talk because you did write something very interesting that I truly believe in. Uh You write that the ancient yogis said that it was important not to believe everything a spiritual teacher tells you and to only believe what you experience. And they prescribed a three-step approach from the Vedic tradition to receive spiritual teaching. So I'd love for you to walk us through that, Reema.
Sure. So I love this too. It's the three steps are Shravan is the first step, which is listening. And so the ancient yogis, they understood that we all have wandering minds, that we're surrounded by distractions now more than ever, but even then, and that the nature of the mind is just to move, right? So Shravan, listening is like consciously setting aside all our distractions and really focusing on the teachings that are being shared. So that's the first step. And then the second is manan, which means reflection. So it's the idea is that you don't just listen to the teachings and believe them just because someone's saying it. You actually, manan is like you take time to reflect. Like, how are these teachings resonating in my own heart, in my own being? And what is my experience of them? And then the third part is it's called nididhyasana, and that means meditation. And this is like the practice where, all yoga practices essentially are meditative, like whether it's movement or mantra or sitting meditation. And so the third part is like, okay, I've heard the teachings, I've reflected upon them. Now I'm actually going to go into these meditative practices and see my direct experience of them. Do they resonate as true in my own being? And that ties into that teaching that only believe what you experience in your own being directly. So it's so liberating and it's so empowering. It's so like not free of dogma, is so beautiful.
Yeah, if only people had access to this framework, because I think it's really needed now more than ever, because I feel like people are just tend to blindly follow what they see, or not even I mean, not always blindly, but they are more prone to absorbing ideology and taking sides
Yeah.
rather than taking a moment to really evaluate it and see how it sits with them. So this is very important, this knowledge that needs to get
Mm.
out there.
And
Yeah.
it can stop us from being so reactive and judgmental. If we
Yes.
actually sit and think like, is this true? Like someone's saying X, Y, and Z, but is it true? Like, let me actually sit with this, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And you briefly touched on the the layers of the body. And I
Mm.
would like us to dig into that a little bit. You say that we have five layers of the body: the physical, energetic, mental, conscious, and bliss bodies. I would like us to specifically talk about the subtle body and how it aligns with the physical body.
Sure. Yeah, so there are these five layers of the body, which are also explained in the Taittiriya Upanishad, again, fifth or sixth century BCE. And they describe the body as like layers, like you can imagine layers of an onion. And the outermost layer is the physical body that we see when we look in the mirror. It's our flesh and bones, and that's the physical body. And then the four layers underneath it, that they're all considered the subtle body. So the first layer underneath the physical body is the energetic body. And that's like our prana, our vital force. And and that like our chakras, our energy centers, the vayus, which are the energetic winds through the body, that's all part of this energetic layer. And then it gets more and more interesting. Like underneath the energetic layer is the mental layer that we touched upon. That's the lower mind, our impulsive thoughts, actions, emotions. So, what shapes the energetic body is that mental layer, our thoughts and emotions. And then even underneath that mental layer is what we call the wisdom body or the conscious body, which is that higher mind where we can pause and like consciously respond to life. So at that level, our thoughts and emotions are different,
Mhm.
right? They're not so impulsive, they're not conditioned. Like we start to break free from the conditioning. And so, and then below that is the bliss body, which is always there, our innermost layer. But whether we connect to that bliss body or not is dependent on what's happening in the thoughts, in our thoughts and in our emotions. And what's happening in our thoughts and emotions, that affects our energetic body, that affects our energy. And then what's happening in our energetic body, that shapes our physical body. So
Yeah.
essentially, the yogis are saying that our thoughts and our emotions, which are the food of our subtle body, is shaping our physical body. It's like affecting our physical health. And it's also affecting our experience of the physical world. So
Yeah.
so the body, it consisted of all of those elements.
Yeah. And I've heard about this before. I read about it in Carolyn Mace's book and also
Okay.
Louise
Yeah.
Hay. I mean, they've all popularized this idea of how energetic blocks, how they kind of manifest in our physical bodies.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because then we see, the yogis, I mean, now it's becoming like so part of science that there's this understanding in science now that our thoughts affect our health. But I feel like science is still catching up to the yogis and how refined their understanding was because the yogis even understood like what kind of thoughts are affecting what parts of the body. and how is that leading to particular types of imbalances and illnesses? So it's not just that our thoughts and emotions affect our health, but there's an understanding that these types of thoughts and emotions affect these types of subtle winds and subtle energy centers, and that's affecting our health. And so if we have that knowledge, then we can shape our yoga practices accordingly. You know, like I'm having digestive issues, and then I have this understanding that, when if I'm experiencing jealousy or confusion, these kinds of emotions, they have more of an effect on the digestive organs. So I can do particular meditations and awareness practices and particular movements to target that area and to help me move through that emotion. It gets
Yeah.
very specific.
Yeah. It's striking how intricate our bodies are, and doesn't that
Yeah.
like baffle you sometimes about how our how we function as humans? It's an amazing piece of machinery we have.
It is. And our task is just to let it do its brilliance, without having habits in our lifestyle that create knots, because prana flows, we're born with prana flowing through us pretty
Mm,
freely and openly. But as we live more and more and we develop certain habits, those granthis, those knots start to form and they inhibit the flow, the free flow of prana. But in the book, one of my favorite stories is the story of my daughter. When she was born, she just was placed on me and she just, you know, um, made her way up to nurse. And that, like, it helped my uterus to contract. It helped to stop my bleeding. Like, our bodies just work so perfectly.
yeah.
And no one whispered into my daughter's ear and said, "Do this for your mom," and
It was
help
instinctual.
heal. It's just prana like
Yeah.
flows through us
Yeah.
naturally and directs us. Like we call it the hidden intelligence of the body or the hidden power of the universe. And it's there, like it's here, we're born with it. But again, those knots that we create through our own thoughts and habits can block the prana and inhibit that wisdom, that intelligence. So it's mind-boggling how how
Yeah.
intricate the body
That's so
is.
beautiful. But thank you for sharing that about your daughter.
Oh
This
yeah.
Um, okay, Rima, before I let you go, I want to very quickly ask you about some of your favorite practices from the 12 pillars of the Yogi's Way, because you've listed so many. I mean, you've not just listed them, you've described them in depth, and there's absolutely no way we can go through all of them. And I encourage everyone to get the book because it's a treasure trove of so many wonderful practices and techniques that you can use. But if you could pick your favorite ones, which one would they be?
I would say my absolute favorite is the consciousness meditation that I introduce in chapter 4, but in chapter 11 we go deep into this meditation, and this is like meditating. So consciousness, it means different things for different people, but in the yoga, in this Vedic tradition, consciousness is another word for the soul or our innermost being. And so at the very, very depths of our being lies this quietness and stillness and vastness. And in the consciousness meditation, we're we're turning our awareness to that space. So even if our thoughts are going and our emotions are here and there, we're just deciding we're not going to pay attention to our thoughts and emotions for these. In the book, it's 6 minutes. For at least 6 minutes, we're just not going to pay attention to the thoughts and the emotions and that river of movement, but we're going to turn our awareness to that silence that resides at our center. And that is really my favorite practice because that's that's like the essence of yoga, connecting with our soul, connecting with that inner silence. And it's peaceful in the moment, but it's like it's endless how we can deepen into our relationship with consciousness and our familiarity and our comfort with consciousness. And that's the treasure, that's when you start to feel directly that, wow, you tap into that vastness, and the observer almost dissolves. So you become that vastness, and you realize that, all that philosophy and all the things that people say, it's actually true. Like, I am an infinite being living in an infinite world, and the possibilities are endless. If only we can stay connected to that truth and have our thoughts and emotions feed that truth, that's like, yeah, just every day meditating on consciousness, and dwelling in that spaciousness more and more. That feels very, very liberating and empowering. So I wish that for everyone.
Love that. Great choice. Really. All right, Reema, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us to share your valuable insight and your extensive knowledge. You're truly illuminating a really beautiful path for all of us who are aspiring to be a better version of ourselves. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be with you.
Okay, and I want to let our listeners know if you want to get a copy of Reema's book, The Yogi's Way, Transform Your Mind, Health, and Reality. You can find it wherever books are sold and on her website, reemayoga.com. There you can also learn more about her sessions, her online courses, and her workshops.